The storm did not arrive quietly over Los Angeles that night. It came with a force that felt almost deliberate, as though the sky itself had chosen to fracture at the exact moment when everything below it was already on the verge of breaking. Rain fell in relentless sheets, blurring the edges of the city into something unrecognizable, washing neon reflections into distorted streaks across the pavement, while thunder rolled overhead with a depth that seemed to echo through bone rather than air. It was not just weather. It was atmosphere, a living extension of the tension that had been building, unseen but undeniable, threading its way through every decision, every secret, every moment of fragile hope that had begun to take root in the lives of those who believed they had finally outrun the past. Inside Taylor's office, the world felt temporarily sealed off from that chaos, yet not untouched by it. The soft, controlled lighting cast long shadows against the walls, shadows that shifted subtly with each flash of lightning from outside, as if the storm were trying to force its way in, to reveal what was hidden beneath the surface. Taylor sat close to Deacon, her composure fractured in a way she rarely allowed anyone to see. There was a tremor in her hands she could not entirely still, a quiet but persistent shaking that betrayed the depth of her fear, a fear she had tried to rationalize, to contain, but which had now grown too large to ignore. Sheila's absence had never felt like safety. It had felt like waiting. Deacon saw that fear clearly, perhaps more clearly than Taylor wanted him to. His presence beside her was steady, grounded, a deliberate contrast to the instability that threatened to overwhelm the moment. When he reached for her, it was not with hesitation, but with a certainty that came from a place deeper than instinct, a need to anchor both of them in something real. His voice, when he spoke, carried a quiet strength, not loud or forceful, but firm enough to push back against the uncertainty that had begun to consume her. He promised protection, not in grand, impossible terms, but in a way that felt immediate and tangible. He would not let anything happen to her. He would stand between her and whatever threat remained. The words were simple, yet they carried weight because of the sincerity behind them, because of the way he held her, as though that promise could be made physical, as though it could be something she could feel rather than just hear. Taylor wanted to believe him. For a moment, she did. She allowed herself to lean into that certainty, to let the warmth of his presence push back against the cold edge of fear that had settled inside her. The world narrowed to that space between them, to the quiet rhythm of breath, to the fragile but undeniable connection that had grown despite everything that had tried to prevent it. It was not perfect, not uncomplicated, but it was real, and in that moment, it felt enough. And then the storm broke through. The sound of the door slamming open did not just interrupt the moment. It shattered it completely, cutting through the quiet like a violent rupture that left no room for denial. The force of it echoed through the office, reverberating off the walls, turning the contained space into something suddenly exposed. Both of them turned instinctively, their bodies reacting before their minds could fully process what was happening, drawn toward the source of the disruption with a sense of inevitability that neither of them could explain. Sheila stood in the doorway. She did not need to announce herself. Her presence was enough. The lightning flashed again, illuminating her in stark contrast against the darkness behind her, freezing the moment into something almost surreal. Her expression was not one of confusion or hesitation, but of clarity, of someone who had arrived exactly where she intended to be. The smile on her lips was controlled, deliberate, carrying with it a quiet menace that did not need to be exaggerated to be understood. Her eyes moved slowly, taking in the scene before her, not with surprise, but with confirmation. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to stop. Deacon's arm remained around Taylor, but the gesture no longer felt protective. It felt exposed, as though the intimacy it represented had been stripped of its privacy and placed under a harsh, unforgiving light. Taylor's breath caught, her body stiffening as recognition collided with disbelief, her mind struggling to reconcile the image before her with the reality she had tried to accept. Sheila was supposed to be gone. Sheila was not gone. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, charged with everything that had not yet been said, everything that did not need to be spoken to be understood. In that silence, the truth of the moment settled with a weight that neither Deacon nor Taylor could escape. There was no explanation that could soften what Sheila had just witnessed. There was no way to reframe it, no way to hide it. The relationship they had tried to navigate quietly, carefully, was now exposed in its most vulnerable form, stripped of context, reduced to a single, undeniable image. Sheila stepped forward slowly, closing the distance with a calm that made the situation even more unsettling. There was no rush in her movements, no loss of control, only a deliberate progression that suggested she had already processed everything she needed to. Her gaze remained fixed on them, sharp and unwavering, as though she were studying not just what she saw, but what it meant, what it confirmed, what it allowed her to do next. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a low intensity that felt more dangerous than any raised tone could have been. It was not the sound of someone reacting in the moment. It was the sound of someone who had already begun to shape the narrative in her mind, who had already decided how this would be interpreted, how it would be used. She called it betrayal, not as an accusation, but as a declaration. The words settled into the space between them, heavy and absolute, leaving no room for interpretation. In Sheila's version of the truth, there was no ambiguity, no complexity. What she saw was what existed, and what existed was something she would not accept, not passively, not without response. Deacon felt the weight of that accusation immediately, not because it was entirely accurate, but because it contained enough truth to be impossible to dismiss. His past with Sheila, his connection to her, the choices he had made, and the ways in which those choices had shifted, none of it could be separated cleanly from the present moment. He had not anticipated this confrontation, had not prepared for the reality of facing Sheila with Taylor at his side, and the result was a stillness that felt less like control and more like shock. Taylor, beside him, experienced the moment differently. For her, Sheila's words were not just an accusation. They were a threat, a confirmation that the danger she had feared was not only real, but immediate. The tremor in her body returned, stronger now, no longer something she could suppress. The past she had tried to move beyond had not simply returned. It had arrived with a clarity that made escape impossible. Sheila's gaze shifted between them, lingering just long enough to ensure that neither of them could avoid it. There was no need for raised voices, no need for dramatic gestures. The tension itself was enough, the unspoken understanding that this moment was not isolated, that it was the beginning of something that would extend far beyond this room. Her anger did not explode outward. It condensed inward, becoming something more focused, more controlled, more dangerous. There was a promise in her expression, not spoken outright, but unmistakable in its intent. This would not end here. This would not be resolved with confrontation alone. What had been revealed would be addressed, not impulsively, but deliberately, with a precision that neither Deacon nor Taylor could yet fully comprehend. Deacon tightened his hold on Taylor, not as a display of defiance, but as an instinctive response to the shift in the room, to the realization that the situation had moved beyond anything he could easily manage. He tried to steady her, to offer reassurance, but even as he did, he understood that his words would carry less weight now, that the presence of Sheila had altered the balance entirely. The storm outside intensified, thunder crashing with a force that seemed to mirror the tension within the room. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the three of them in stark, unforgiving light, capturing the moment in a way that felt almost symbolic. There was no hiding now, no retreat into ambiguity. Everything was exposed, and yet nothing was resolved. Sheila did not move to attack, did not escalate the situation in a way that could be easily anticipated. Instead, she allowed the moment to linger, to settle, to imprint itself fully before taking a single step back. It was a calculated withdrawal, one that suggested confidence rather than retreat, as though she did not need to act immediately because she already understood how this would unfold. Her final look carried that certainty. Then she was gone. The door remained open, the storm visible beyond it, rain continuing to fall as though nothing had changed. But everything had. Deacon and Taylor remained where they were, the silence returning, but no longer carrying the same meaning. It was not a space of intimacy now, but of realization, of understanding that the fragile peace they had begun to build had been shattered in an instant, replaced by something far more volatile. Taylor's fear had been justified. Deacon's promise had been tested. And somewhere beyond that open door, beyond the storm, Sheila was already moving forward, her path clear, her purpose sharpened by what she had just seen. The thunder rolled again, louder this time, as if echoing the truth neither of them could deny. This was not the end of the confrontation. It was the beginning of a war neither side would walk away from unchanged. The storm did not fade after Sheila disappeared from Taylor's office. It seemed to follow her, clinging to the city like a living force that refused to release its grip. Thunder continued to roll across the skyline, not as background noise, but as a steady reminder that something had shifted beyond repair, something that would not settle back in a quiet no matter how desperately those caught in its path wished it would. For Deacon and Taylor, the silence left behind in that office was heavier than any argument, more suffocating than any confrontation. It was the silence of realization, of understanding that what had just happened was not an isolated moment of chaos, but the opening move in something far more calculated. Sheila, meanwhile, did not retreat into fear or confusion. She moved with purpose. Her footsteps through the rain were steady, unhurried, as though she had already decided what came next long before she walked into that office. The revelation she had forced upon Deacon and Taylor had not been about confrontation alone. It had been about clarity. Now she knew exactly where everyone stood, exactly what they valued, exactly what could be taken from them. And once Sheila understood what mattered most, she knew precisely how to weaponize it. The next step was not Deacon. It was Bill. Bill existed in a different space than the others, a man defined by power, control, and the illusion that he could anticipate every move before it happened. He was not easily manipulated, not easily cornered, and that was precisely why Sheila chose him. If she could break through Bill's certainty, if she could force him into a position where he had to react rather than dictate, then the ripple effect would extend far beyond him, reaching into every life connected to his. By the time Sheila arrived at Bill's property, the storm had intensified, rain striking glass and steel with relentless force. The contrast between the chaos outside and the controlled environment within only sharpened the tension, turning the space into something that felt almost staged, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. Sheila did not hesitate. She entered with the same calm certainty she had carried all night, her presence cutting through the structure of the room in a way that could not be ignored. Bill saw her immediately. There was no confusion in his expression, no disbelief. If anything, there was recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that something inevitable had finally arrived. He did not greet her, did not ask questions, because he understood instinctively that this was not a conversation that would begin with pleasantries. Sheila did not come to negotiate in the traditional sense. She came to present a reality he would have to confront. The space between them felt charged, not with chaos, but with precision. When Sheila finally spoke, her voice was steady, controlled, carrying none of the volatility one might expect from someone driven by anger. Instead, it held something far more unsettling, certainty. She did not build toward her point. She delivered it directly, with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. She laid out her demand. Bill would take her in, not just her, but Luna as well. He would provide them with protection, with resources, with the kind of controlled environment that would allow Sheila to continue her plans without interference. He would not question it. He would not resist it. He would accept it as necessary. And if he refused, there would be consequences. This was where Sheila's strategy revealed itself in full. She did not threaten Bill directly. She did not attack his power, his wealth, or his influence. She targeted something far more effective, something far more personal. She brought Will into the equation, not as an abstract possibility, but as a tangible risk, a consequence that could be realized with terrifying speed. The implication was clear. Will could be destroyed. Not physically, not in a way that would draw immediate attention, but through systems that Bill understood all too well. Legal pressure, evidence manipulated or revealed at the right moment. Circumstances engineered to place Will in a position where he could not escape accountability for something he may not even fully understand. Sheila did not need to provide details. The lack of specifics made the threat even more dangerous, because it forced Bill to imagine the possibilities himself, to fill in the gaps with his own understanding of how power could be used against him. For the first time since Sheila entered, something shifted in Bill's expression. It was not fear. It was calculation interrupted. He was a man who operated on control, on the ability to see several moves ahead, to anticipate outcomes before they occurred. But Sheila had introduced an element he could not fully predict, a variable that existed outside the systems he usually manipulated. She was not asking for negotiation. She was presenting an ultimatum built on a foundation he could not easily dismantle. His mind moved quickly, assessing, analyzing, searching for leverage, for weakness, for any point where he could push back. But every path led to the same conclusion. Sheila was not bluffing. She did not need to be. Her strength had never come from resources or influence. It came from her willingness to act without hesitation, to cross lines others would not, to operate in spaces where consequences were secondary to outcome. And that made her unpredictable in a way that even Bill could not fully counter. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken calculations. Sheila did not rush him. She allowed the weight of her words to settle, to take root, to force him into a position where he had to confront the reality she had placed before him. This was not about convincing him. It was about giving him time to understand that the choice she offered was not truly a choice at all. In that moment, Bill realized something he had not anticipated. He was not in control. The realization did not come with panic, but with a sharp, focused awareness that altered the way he approached the situation. If he could not dominate the moment, he would have to survive it. If he could not dismantle Sheila's plan immediately, he would have to step into it, at least temporarily, to understand it from within. His response, when it came, was measured. He did not agree outright. He did not refuse. He acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement, something subtle but significant shifted. It was not surrender, but it was not resistance either. It was a strategic pause, a decision to engage on Sheila's terms for now, while searching for a way to regain the upper hand. Sheila recognized that shift instantly. A small smile formed, not wide, not exaggerated, but unmistakably satisfied. She did not need a full agreement. She only needed movement in the direction she had set, and Bill's response provided exactly that. The door had opened. The next steps would follow. Somewhere else in the city, unaware of the exact terms being set, but already feeling the consequences, Deacon and Taylor remained caught in the aftermath of their own confrontation. The storm outside continued to rage, but it was no longer the most dangerous force in motion. That force had taken shape in the decisions being made, in the alliances being formed, in the quiet agreements that would soon ripple outward and disrupt everything they believed they could protect. And at the center of it all, Sheila moved forward with absolute clarity. She had lost nothing. She had gained everything she needed. As the thunder rolled once more across the city, louder, closer, more insistent, it carried with it the unmistakable sense that the lines had been drawn, that the next phase had begun, and that no one, not even someone as powerful as Bill, could step away from what was coming without paying a price.